our panelists are going to talk about defining good security hygiene in the enterprise. And so our first question this morning is, what is the first step a system administrator or CIO can take to begin the process of system-wide cyber hygiene? And, are there certain planning documents you use in your processes? We're just going to open up with Eric. Would you like to add a few words and talk a little bit about your enterprise?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll kind of, I guess, address the question. And again, like Don said, I mean, I'm very open to any questions that you have along the way. So this isn't a huge group, and I want it to be meaningful. So I have talking points to share, but if they're not really what you're all that interested in, you're not going to hurt my feelings. And if you need to take it in a different direction and you want to know more specifically about what we do at Bellarmine, I mean, there might be something interesting on the higher ed side. You're not going to insult me to ask. So by all means, use the chat and ask questions. But I guess I'll just share a few thoughts on like, what do you do? Because security can be pretty daunting, especially at the enterprise level. So we all have unique situations and challenges that come along. So I know Elias will have some similarities that we have, but also he'll have some things that are very different. But I guess my advice would be to have a plan. Is kind of step one. Always be learning and make friends. Those would be like the three things I would say. So I feel like you've got to have a plan, because if you don't, then you're never going to know what you're trying to do, right? So the next best thing that comes along, you'll be chasing that, and you don't really know if that fits into your strategy. So is that going to help what you're doing? Is it going to be a distraction? So just start with some kind of framework or plan. And if you don't know, just start with maybe NIST, the National Institute for Standards, and you could really look to different frameworks that they stand up and begin to model after that. So they'll have, a series of focus areas and begin to build out controls and mitigation tactics that align with things that are put out there, and then be open to letting that be flexible. So as you continue to evolve that, learn your risks. So the risks, we're all going to share some of the same risks again, and then some will be very specific to your industry or maybe your organization. And you need to know what those are. And you really need to rank those risks, because something might be a high risk with a very low probability. So really, you need to focus your efforts on the things that are going to have the biggest yield for you. So understanding your risks, marrying that back to the probability or the likelihood of occurrence is pretty critical. And again, as I said, some will be pretty common across IT, but that's where I think the learning aspect and friends come in. So you've got to have an interest in security. If you just, you can't, I've seen CEOs before that have felt like security is just a purchase. And so we'll go out and we'll purchase this product and we're good, right? With no concept of this is something that needs to live and breathe and run, and we're going to continue to tweak it. It's kind of like you're buying a car, and you're going to be driving it, you're going to be maintaining it, and at some point you're probably going to need to replace that car. And maybe transportation's changed along the way, so maybe you're going to move to a plane, and so as you keep moving forward. But just that idea. And then I guess another piece of advice I would just throw in there that kind of ties along is you begin to build this documentation, this plan that you have, make it useful. I think the worst thing you could do is just get some kind of a framework document, throw it out, build a few responses, trap them in a Word document, and shove it in a folder somewhere, and it doesn't really help anybody. I think whatever you do, your documentation has to live. And if you want to know more about how we try to make that live at Bellarmine, I can speak to that. But use tools that are collaborative. For us, that's a lot of planner boards and maybe wiki pages where everybody's contributing, and we're kind of working in a way that we can benefit each other just by doing the work and not spending time kind of just going back and sweeping up documentation that won't be meaningful. So a couple thoughts there. What do you think, Elias?
No, I mean, so hey, Eric, I think you hit it right on the head, right? So starting off with that strategy first and foremost, right? So given when you think about where we are right now dealing with COVID-19 and the pandemic, and so reflect back on my 20 space, with the pandemic, there's obviously, there's, hey, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this. And so the strategy that Eric is speaking to, because I've got actually two things on that. First would be, with the strategy. Eric's absolutely correct. You have to have, given that this current state of events, have kind of that roadmap as that guidance, right? Or maybe it's that true star, that true north. And so you've always got something that's at least strategically you can fall back on. Because in some places, trust me, if you don't have that plan, you will be all over the place. And sometimes your efforts put in a particular area or focus direction could be all for naught, but you always want to have that plan. I would also say too, keep it simple, right? A lot of times it comes really just doing that security one-on-one, that basic blocking and tackling. In some cases, teams may feel go out and buy the next best shiny thing. Well, but okay, but how does that fit into your strategy? How is that actually, is that something you're addressing on your risk register? It is a high risk for your company, right? It's easy for a vendor, some vendors come in and they would make a very terrific, sales pitch and get you all excited to go spend this money, but then you don't know necessarily how it fits into to your organization, to your plan, your strategy. The NIST documentation, absolutely. For us, we use NIST and then ISO as well as our framework, and we pick and choose from each and every one from those. We don't follow each one to the letter of the T, but what we have done is we Brown-Formanize it, get it to where it fits and it works, best, for us. And so, but what I think when coming back to the question, kind of what's that first step you want to do kind of in that cyber hygiene, and the cyber hygiene is pretty much, like your personal hygiene, right? You want to make sure, you're keeping your stuff up, you're keeping healthy and these kind of things. And so cyber hygiene is the exact same thing. And the two reasons probably why you want to do that, one is the maintenance and upkeep, right? So all your resources that you're using, they're running at that peak performance. But also the second piece would be from a security standpoint. And so the very first thing I would probably recommend is kind of getting an asset inventory. And what I mean by that is I'm not talking about your hardware, any software that you guys might have installed on your assets themselves, or even what web applications are your folks using. When you think about cyber security, we cannot guard and protect a full 360 degrees, right? I mean, unless you guys are very good at sales and marketing and have a huge extensive budget, I don't think that's always the case, right? So, but by identifying, and building up that asset inventory, you now know what you have. But also understand that asset inventory is also about understanding your data, right? It's that data discovery. Where does my data sit? Particularly, where does my sensitive data sit? And so that would be that first step. Because I think once you're able to do that, then as Eric was saying, you're able to go look at, okay, hey, what are my risks based on where this data sits? What can I do to kind of mitigate that risk and minimize that? And so, but yeah, I think the first step out the gate would definitely be to get that asset inventory together. Once again, I'm talking hardware, software, and data as well.
So what about employee education? Are there certain activities that both of you take inside your organization in terms of getting your people up to speed on what's the latest and greatest in the field? Are there certain, programs that you're working? Eric?
Sure. And, I think Elias made a really interesting point that's worth teasing out a little more that really feeds into this. And that was, understanding your data and where your data are. Because the world's changed a lot, right? And so if we go back 20 years to what being IT was, you were running a data center, you were serving information and information assets out of something that was completely under your control. And now we have little control over that, so there's just this proliferation of SaaS resources and assets and our data are all over the place. And by and large, users, they don't care. And so it's a headache for those of us on the IT side, but users, they just want it to be convenient and easy. And how dare you tell me that I can't have my, whatever system. And so it's really hard. And I think as far as security and education goes, it's shifted a little bit. So before, maybe we were thinking a lot about the education of information security and IT security. And now, like Elias said, it's data security. So it's understanding where are your data? What are you trying to protect? And, just scrutinizing a contract to understand at least that you have some kind of favorable terms, not that that's going to necessarily help you when they have the breach, because it's still going to be on you. But but beginning to help users understand, okay, just because maybe I have this service and it was a fantastic bargain, maybe I shouldn't blow all my data into that, right? And helping them kind of understand where things sit. And I think that's powerful. And so when you think about security, we try to help just people understand, maybe if we can teach you how to protect yourself better in your personal life, that'll bleed over into your work in our organization. So we have engaged for our kind of our mass user education. We do a service through Know Before. So we've looked at a couple different products. This one's pretty has been very cost effective for us. And still, with that, we launched these massive training campaigns and spend most of our time just trying to get people through to completion of these. We've shortened a lot of the number of modules that we require our campus to complete, just because, we know that if we give you a huge digest of things to do, it's not going to happen, and it's hard. So we try to make it, meaningful to them personally, and if we could draw on some examples that show where they might expose things that could cost them, then that'll hopefully bleed over into a way that they conduct themselves. But also, as to Elias's point of keeping it simple, I totally agree. It has to be succinct. It has to speak to some kind of a specific touch point to that user. So that's kind of the big holistic approach. And then we also do a thing at Bellarmine. We call it the town hall, and we do like a monthly town hall meeting, and we just try to have an open period. There's an hour. We'll stand up on stage and we'll just talk about topical things in the area of information security, really lots of IT things, but trying to hit on, hey, here's a new attack vector that's out there. Here's a new thing that you need to be aware of, and how you might go about keeping yourself safe. Just simple things, or answering the questions like, why do we make you patch your systems? Why do we drive those updates? And hopefully making people understand so that they don't just get angry when all these things roll through. So.
Oh man,
Yes.
Eric, you're talking to the gospel, man. And so, so very much, comfortable. I guess you guys notice we're going to be feeding off each other, right? So it just happens since there's some commonality, right? So, for us, Don, as you're talking about the education things, and as Eric was speaking, that security awareness piece is definitely a big thing for us at Brown-Forman, and so very comparable to what Eric and those folks are doing at Bellarmine. We have, email phishing campaigns we do, and we conduct these quarterly. So this is one part of our overall security awareness program. And so, and you think about what's happening with COVID-19 right now. Before COVID, you had your random type of, attack vectors, how bad guys are trying to get in. And now with the pandemic, I think 80-90% of that threat vector right now is all, phishing emails, right? And they're all tied to the pandemic, whether it be tracing the infection, right, or even some cases, the U.S. stimulus check, et cetera, so on, right? So really, we're trying to get in front of that, and by having these quarterly type of phishing campaigns, but also too, we partner with our crisis management team, and they send out periodic communications on the status of, hey, when is Brown-Forman going to open back up, the phases, et cetera, so on. So we use that as an opportunity to go out to talk about some of the threat vectors that are out there. And so that we know, and sometimes it happens, if security sends out a communication, people get it and they delete it, right? But given the current crisis, if anything is coming out from the crisis management team, people are definitely going to read it. So we jump in and ride those coattails to get our message out. But also, as Eric mentioned as well, I think the big thing in our security communications as well, and those tips and tricks, we often try to answer that question up front: what's in it for them, right? And so if anything, if it's marketing or communication, right, you probably got a couple of seconds, 15, 20, 30 seconds to say, hey, what's in it for me? And if you don't do that, then they're out. So a lot of the communications we send out now, these are things that, there's I'll show you a motive, but there's a benefit to the company. But what we're doing, kind of like as Eric mentioned, we're trying to help them better protect themselves, right? And so if they have good cyber hygiene at home, then the hope and the thought would be that same thing would transfer over, into work as well, right? So it's kind of, two birds with one stone, if you will. The other thing that we're educating our users on is really the dangers of trying to install software that's not, IT sanctioned or approved. Prior to joining Brown-Forman, we were kind of the wild, wild west, right? So it was very open. Users had the local admin rights, so they had the ability to install software freely. And so what I've done is when I come on board was to talk about, use that house analogy, saying, hey, look, I'm not trying to close all the doors and windows to the house, but I am trying to close as many as possible. And so obviously, as you can imagine, that did, we want the business to operate. We want to minimize business disruption, and we did that. But we also provide our users, we're not just going to say, hey, you can't install this software, but what we have done, if you think it has a valid business need, then route it through this workflow. So we do have workflows that allow our users to come in and request for new software to be whitelisted, but understand that software is being looked at, hey, is it going to be compatible with our environment, right? Is it going to throw anything, aloof in the network? Is it going to cause any, issues with other software applications running on the asset itself? But we also look at, my team specifically, what are the risks or vulnerabilities, or are we looking at introducing, into our environment, our space? And if so, is the benefit of this software, does it outweigh, the risk that we're undertaking in that case? At that point in time, it becomes a risk-based conversation. But definitely, security awareness, and then just the dangers around the threat vectors that are out there, and particularly the one we focused on as of late has been the ability to install software freely, which we have curbed that.
So what about software that you've added to the network as it relates to the company and in your cyber hygiene? Are there certain products that you would recommend based on some of your experiences that you think are good? And then you have to quantify that based on size of company, right? So give us a little framework of the size and scope of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, a fair question, Dawn. I think, each company is different, right? And so, but I'll step back to your point. So at Brown-Forman, we're roughly 4,500 employees, 5,500 if we add contractors on top of that. And so understand we are for us, our mantra has always been mobile, global, and in the cloud, right? So what happens is you see that reflected in a number of tool sets that we use, right? So we are a Google shop. So we have all the G Suite things that are out there in addition to Gmail, Google Docs, Sheets, etc. We do have a small contingent of folks on Office 365. Some folks just can't let Excel go, right? Because Google Sheets doesn't do that same functionality, those kind of things, right? And so, but other cloud systems that we have, SaaS products, you're talking about Salesforce, Workday, et cetera, so on. And so when you ask about what applications, folks could use or could I recommend, I think that really kind of comes to really understanding what that business need is. But obviously there are those core background systems such as, HR, your other CRM tools, et cetera, so on. And so it really probably is, what best lines it fits with that business.
Okay, Eric?
We haven't necessarily added any heavy-duty solutions, but we have matured things. It was part of our strategy anyway, so I don't know that it was in response to COVID, but we're certainly accelerating that. But I'll say, the challenge that we've had, so I've been at Bellarmine about 8 years, and the landscape has shifted a lot. So before, as I said earlier on, we all had data centers. We were securing the perimeter. We had a very defined perimeter. We knew points of ingress and egress. It was really easy to understand the consumption of our information assets, right? But now, the 1, 2, 3 killer SaaS apps that go up out there, how do you deal with that? And our strategy has been, we need to control authentication. That's critical for us. So, requiring that every SaaS solution that we onboard goes through our SSO tool, and which for us, it was ADFS, but now we've shifted to Azure AD. And that's our entry point. And so we've really focused hard on making sure everything that we integrate with goes through that entry point, and that we're getting rich logging and information that we pull from that. The other thing that we've rapidly matured over this last year really is an internal elk stack that we run. So, you know, this Splunk seemed a little too dear for us to acquire, but elk has been kind of in our wheelhouse. And so this idea where we're able to amass all of the logs from lots of disparate systems, kind of pour them into one aggregation system, that has been invaluable for us. So as we run down security incidents or we try to troubleshoot things, our tight coupling of the Azure AD along with elk has been really a primary strategy for us. And so I don't see that moving. You know, I see over time more and more kind of critical functionality that from a traditional data center shifting, you know, into cloud somehow, whether that be SaaS or, you know, if it's just some type of platform hosted cloud offering. So, but still you know, the main entry point for us is going to be that kind of SSO and really gaining deep understanding. On top of that, as we think strategically moving forward, you know, we want to start to really bring kind of conditional access into that. And that's really a good point for us to do that. And if we get good at that, you know, more multi-factor authentication techniques baked in there with conditional access, you know, maybe then we can start to dial it down to being more usable and less onerous for the user community, because I certainly get that if it's hard to use and frustrating, then people back away and they'll start doing their own thing. So, you know, we're really benefited by users using the tools that we offer, because that's where our insights can matter, you know, and that we can see that we're protecting the data that's under our control.
Yep, and if I could add to that, right? So, so Eric is spot on with that as well, right? So with us, you know, like I said, mobile, global, in the cloud, particularly for those SaaS apps, right? And so, you know, products that one product we use is Okta, right? Okta is also for that SSO, but it's also for that multi-factor authentication. And you know, we talk about ease of use, absolutely. And so we're looking at that same thing, contextual. MFA, but also too, how do we even get to a passwordless type of experience, right? So I know there are other products out there that do this, right? So, and I think, you know, depending on who you talk to, you'll find we have different system solutions. I think as Eric was talking about Splunk, you know, we currently do have Splunk in as our log management system to help aggregate that log information, kind of do that initial heads and tails, basic forensics. But we also outsource our security operations to a third party. And I think I'll hold that. I won't get into that, you know, right now just yet, but I just wanted to add to kind of what Eric was mentioning, you know, with a lot of the SaaS products, as you start, hopefully you are, if you are starting to move more into the cloud, then there are certain products out there that will help you with that SSO and MFA aspect. So you can add that extra layer of security when it comes to identity and access management.
The Internet of Things, are you up against some new security issues with implementing Internet of Things? I know Brown-Forman is looking at Internet of Things in production, correct?
Yep, correct, right? And so, you see I have no hair, right? So, and that typically stems from, you know, in the past, historically, the corporate network and the operational technology, you know, OT, that production network has always been separate. But now the two are starting to blur. And so this is now requiring my team and I to step into a space that we typically have not, you know, given any attention to. And specifically what's happening is on two things. First off, as IoT continues to continues, it's already here, but it just continues, you know, we're going to have so many billions of devices connected here soon. Our production engineers down at sites like Jack Daniels or Woodford, you know, they're looking to also introduce that IoT into these production sites, their facilities. But when you look at where our production sites are located, you know, Lynchburg, Tennessee, Versailles, you know, out here in Kentucky, there are not a lot of large businesses that are in there. And so in order for our guys to take advantage of some of these IoT devices that help them become more efficient and effective with running that line, barrel yield, etc., they have to
and he squeezes his way out. And I pick him up and he goes,
Someone.
That's right. Okay.
his food. And I put him down and he runs and starts snacking.
We had someone join and we just let them go.
Okay. All right. No, fair enough. But my main point here is that, and so what happens is, in order for some of these companies, whether it be a Siemens, Allen Bradley, et cetera, they don't have a lot of boots on the ground at those locations. And so they need a way to be able to remotely, remote in and access that particular device to run diagnostics, troubleshooting, and these kind of things. And so for us, we've got to make sure that how do we set this up to where, because you can put solutions in place that bog it down, and then they really have a tough time getting in and supporting that particular device. And so how do you make sure it's they can connect, not necessarily freely, but they can connect and be able to do the work they need to do, but in a secure fashion. And so that's the one aspect. The second aspect is that with all these devices now on these production lines, our production engineers are getting back, massive amounts of information and data to where it's becoming overwhelming. And so the challenge for them is how do they make, take this data and make it information that can help them become more efficient? How do we improve barrel yield, et cetera, so on. And so a lot of those data analytics tools we have on our corporate network, right? And so all this data resides on the OT network. And so they want to use the tools on the corporate network for this. And so this is something we're currently looking at. We're kind of dipping our toe into the water before we wade into the pool just yet. But those two things are kind of what we're seeing right now. And really, how do we wrestle with that? But once again, make sure that the production sites get what they need. The vendors can provide that support. But that's kind of how IoT is impacting us right now. It's predominantly at our production sites. And once again, in the past, we have kind of turned a blind eye to that. But now we have to, put eyes on it. And so one of the things we're doing right now, we are partnering with Trace3 to actually do a risk assessment down at Jack Daniels. We figure if we can figure this out for Jack being the largest of all our production sites, then we can pretty much figure out it'll work anywhere else. And so what we've asked Trace3, which Nick is part of that team, is to come in and help us. You heard me earlier talk about asset inventory, right? So help us come in and understand what assets do we have on these particular production lines. Also help us understand, let's get current and let's produce some network diagrams. So we understand, how everything is connected, where the data flows, and where it lives, et cetera, so on. But I think the real big takeaway from this assessment is going to be, they are going to put an appliance on the network. It will be in a passive mode. It will listen. But what this appliance is going to do is then help us understand our traffic, but also where do we have risk on that production network, right? Before I allow those data engineers to potentially put their data into our data analytics tools, I want to make sure that side of the house is clean. And so Trace3 is coming through. They're not only are they going to identify those risks and vulnerabilities, but they're also are going to generate a roadmap, a plan, if you will, and a prioritized list of saying, hey, if I were you, this is where I would recommend start first, and here's the action that I would take. And so, but that's how IoT is definitely is impacting us, and we're quickly moving forward in that space to get smarter, so that we can potentially get in front of this and be proactive.
Eric, are you seeing any issues in your organization?
Yeah, so we're on the other end of the spectrum. We have, obviously with what we do, we're not producing anything. We don't have manufacturing lines. Our OT is, really limited to our HVAC networks. And the upshot there is they're so old that we don't have to worry about any IP traffic that's rolling off of those. So that's not a big deal. We have talked about putting in some more control servers. It's funny, actually, I started my career in HVAC doing control systems, and that was a long time ago, but really seeing like the move to trying to get unified communications happening out of, kind of those OT devices, and now that being real, and then thinking that all of that move has brought this whole new wealth of, entry points and attack vectors to networks is interesting. I think while not specifically OT, maybe more of the challenge that we have is, we bring a lot of, maybe every year we're bringing 700 new students onto campus. Every student that comes in is bringing, between 2 and 6 devices. We're going into a res hall and connecting all those devices. And so, really just making sure that we continue to, give them the bandwidth to help those things work, but also protect what those devices might bring. New attacks to the network, things that are maybe not yet discovered. But when I think about that, I think about a lot of Alexas that start to show up, and what that does to the security posture on our network. It's while not directly OT, it is kind of the Internet of Things sort of beginning to pound us, and all these new devices, and how do we defend against that? So it's an evolving challenge.
So as you're dealing with, COVID-19 in this pandemic, are there certain, best practices that you have been looking at or implementing? We're really not going to see the end of this for a while, so we'll probably be, doing more remote communications for at least, I would say, 9 months to a year. What are you seeing in your organization, Elias? Are there certain things you've stepped forward on to just, deal with the whole situation and move us forward in cyber hygiene?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely, Don. Two things actually. So one, we talked about security awareness. So certainly want to increase that effort, staying in front of that. And so that may require us to, right now, we are on a quarterly rhythm with our phishing campaigns. And so one of the things we talked about amongst ourselves as a team, we get to take to the CIO is, do we want to get to a monthly rhythm, right? Our users have a high level of security awareness, but we want to maintain, that edge, right, a little bit to where we're in front of this a little bit. Also, too, I would say policy awareness. We have a lot of policies to talk about, just what you do when you get out on social media sites, right? What you can and can't do, et cetera, so on. So it's easier because I think sometimes when you're in the office, you're working constantly with your peers, right? So you're not thinking about going out social media, posting, et cetera. And then I think what happens is, obviously we work from home, work and personal blend. And so it's not uncommon, I think, for people now, myself included, I'll be in the middle of something, right? And let me go check this really quick. Oh, I want to add a comment, right? So I think we also try to alert our folks about certain policies. But the other thing that we've done, because we have seen ransomware, take off. I think I was reading earlier this week with Honda, I think some of their production operations were impacted by ransomware. And so we have an incident response team, and we meet twice a year. The first time we meet is kind of to onboard new people, more administrative. And the second time is we actually have a tabletop or a cyber drill. And so that's annual right now. But given that we're going to be, to your point, we're going to be at this for a while, do we need to also look at doing those more frequently, right? So it's almost like exercising. The more you exercise that muscle, the better, stronger it's going to get, right? So when something happens, you break the glass, hey, call a team together, off we go, and we're ready to get into action. One thing I think too, Eric mentioned as well, and this helps with it's kind of that monitoring detection. It is really log monitoring. And so for us, we outsource security operations to a third-party partner of ours. And with that, since we have been in the pandemic, we've really stressed to them, hey, we want them to have a heightened level of awareness as they go through and take these log files, ingest into their SIM. And then we've kind of said, hey, even if you think this may not be serious, right? We've got certain guidelines and criteria that says, if it is this, an email will suffice or a text will suffice. If it's something that is of a certain severity, then pick up the phone. But we have our partner on high alert with that log monitoring, just to make sure that, hey, I'm always asking. We meet with this particular partner weekly for our ops meetings. I'm always asking, and we're looking at data weekly now to see, hey, where do we have any abnormal activity, traffic, these kind of things that may be indicative that something's going on. So security awareness, policy awareness, the tabletops, increasing those potentially more. And then even to just the whole, the log monitoring, right? That whole monitoring and detection of your network being vigilant at monitoring that. And just look for, any and everything. Do that extra due diligence, so that way you can sleep better, better at night. MFA, obviously, that's going to be here to stay. I think that's one of the things we've been on Okta for the last 4 years, so we're pretty good at that now. But I would say if folks in attendance are not using that, then you want to transition to that, because this work from home, this very well could be our new norm. So you want to make sure that you've got security in place and how your people access your resources.
Well, Eric, you're dealing with college students. They may go, they may not go, they might go, and then they might be back. How are you handling that in terms of cyber hygiene?
Well, so for us, yeah, the transition, it's a little different. I mean, we certainly had to worry about staff and faculty that needed to shift and work from home. And, that caused us to make some adjustments to VPN concepts. We had to quickly pivot and do some split tunneling just to keep us from getting crushed on internet bandwidth. But the biggest piece for us is, we really shifted 95% of our education, which was in classroom, to online. And we did that in 3 to 4 days. So it was pretty dramatic. We're a Microsoft school. So, in the higher education space, or really in the EDU space, Microsoft offers some very compelling reasons to be a Microsoft school. So we have a kind of a concept in IT at Bellarmine. We have what we call the impact framework, and there's really 10 tenets of that. And one of them is maximization. And so, when you've got a resource, when you've got an asset, we try to use all of it. And so we try to really use our Microsoft subscriptions to their fullest. And so part of that is being all in the ecosystem. And so we really 2 years ago adopted Teams pretty heavily, certainly heavily on the IT side, and then have been evangelizing that relentlessly for years. Had we not been doing that, we'd have been burned pretty bad, because we wouldn't have really had a remote platform to leverage to begin to even stand up the education on top of. So I say all that to say our Teams usage went up about 20 times in a week, right? And so we had been steadily trying to really build our buy-in on that, and then as hard as we tried to drive it for 2 years, this pandemic drove it in a day. What's powerful about that is that's allowed us a lot of insights into how things are being used. One of the things that we really try to do, and really every educational institution tries to do, is use the data that we have to figure out how to improve student success. So that's kind of a big bogey that universities try to do, is figure out where are ways that we can provide services and support to help students. So rather than it being kind of punitive, the old
Thanks for
axioms.
calling Marwood. This is Jim.
You look left, right, these classmates aren't going to be there. I mean, our goal is to try to say, if you can make it into our institution, we want you to be successful, right? And so what are the services that can help you be successful? And by having more utilization in these core platforms, we can start to leverage the data to really understand those things. The other thing is, if I can get everybody into this ecosystem, I have one thing I'm trying to protect. And so that really helps, when it gets back into risk. And so for us, being in just a few platforms that we can tightly govern the outside the bounds of, and then allow people to kind of do it somewhat organically in their way inside of the sandbox we give them, makes me feel good and makes them feel good. Because I've spent years trying to say, oh, here's the way you should do every single thing, but that just never works. People want to do it their way, but I want you to do it your way within the tools that are our tools that we control. We have good agreements on. We feel good about our data privacy, and so what that allows us to do is, just like Elias said, really dive into MFA, which is critical. I'd love to say we're as mature as Brown-Forman, but we're not. It's honestly a fight for me to get MFA to be mandated across the board. So I have to really have a strategy of conditional access and taking our most, it's important for us to really figure out what are the data, what are we trying to protect? what's most critical to us, and let's get that behind these walls where we can provide conditional access, and I can control the things that that really I think would damage the institution, or where they compromised, or where we try to focus heavily. So I think the big advantage that we've had in this is now that everybody has to use these tools. You know, it was an option that you had before being on campus. Yeah, I don't want to use that. I'm just going to like walk next door and say the thing I have to say. Well, you can't do that now. So it's going to have to be transmitted digitally in some way. And so if that's happening, you know, what are the things that we can bring back and show people their patterns? I'll say one other thing, which is, you know, Microsoft, and I know other providers have these, has a really powerful tool called, they call it like their My Analytics or Insights, and it shows you how you work. So there's now a new app that they have in the Microsoft 365 suite, Insights. You click on that, you go in, and it starts to show you, hey, you know, here are your top collaborators. Here is your second tier of collaboration. Here's your third tier. Oh, you know, you have your week scheduled such that you have 40% of your time with your ability to focus. Oh, you know what? Over the past month, you didn't have any quiet days. You're answering emails, you know, at times that are outside of your base zone. So it's really useful to then begin to show people how they're working, who they're working with. And I think that's opening a lot of eyes. And then maybe we can start to layer in ways that you can better protect yourself and your coworkers, just by understanding how it is that you're working, things that you didn't really realize before. So I think a lot of that security awareness and information awareness and digital awareness is a big thing that we're trying to really seize this opportunity and move forward. So.
And so I would even add to that. So just, and I know some have done this, right? And so, you know, Eric, I know you're working through this, you and your team at Bellarmine. I think, as you mentioned before as well, some cases where if you've been trying and you've got a solid business case, and, you know, I think others have been successful with this. You know, the pandemic has certainly, you know, allowed them any type of roadblock or obstacles they might have had before all of a sudden got moved, right? And so I think I know a couple of people have tried that and to some success from that standpoint. And so I think in your case, as you were talking about with MFA, you know, I think we had some challenges with that initially as well, because it was interesting. People would often look at work and personal different. And so we often had to kind of, so wait a minute, work, you're already doing this in your personal life. You know, when you go to your bank, you go this, right? And it's like, yeah, okay, but you don't want to do it here for work. Well, no, this is work. I want to get right in, right? So, you know, I think, you know, in some cases people have found success with that, but I just share that with you. I know we had to personalize it and eventually try to get to that. But yeah, that struggle is very real, and we went through that before we eventually, and it was the phishing results that were part of that business case that got leadership to understand it and, you know, look to, you know, invest in that product. So.
Yeah. No, and I like your point. That's really interesting when it's like, yeah, hey, it's my personal life. I'm going to work pretty hard to protect this, but this is just
Yeah.
where it's way too onerous, you know? And
Yeah. Trust me,
absolutely.
that struggle is real. That's security and convenience, right? They're
Right.
inverse and
Yeah.
personal, right? So it's just one of those things where it's like, I think for us as security IT professionals, we get it. And then some of our folks we're trying to support as we move forward with these initiatives to mature the program. You know, we were talking about change management earlier, and it is a big thing. And so we often have to equate it to things they do often in their personal life. It's like, okay, and the difference is, and then usually that's how you get them. And so it takes some work to get there.
Well, and it's funny, you know, you say that, like we're part of an organization, it's kind of higher ed specific, but RIN ISAC. And so that's Research and Education Networks, Information Sharings, and Analysis Center, and they will come back and they'll give us reports. They do a lot of monitoring on the dark web for credentials that are being sold.
Yep.
And we'll get reports from time to time, you know, here's a block of credentials that have been, you know, bandied about on the dark web. And so I'll alert our users like, hey, you know, you've been compromised. You need to get a password change in, whatever, but you need to be aware that this account, so anywhere else you were using this password, like
Right.
it's out there, right? So I'd be changing that everywhere. I'll have people that want to argue with me. I don't have an account there. I'm like, well, you do, because you just gave me your username and password. So I know, but yet they want to tell me it didn't happen. So it's like, okay, but you know, we're going to change your Bellarmine one, and I suggest you protect yourself personally. But yeah.
And Don, the reason why I bring that up, right? So we keep talking about cyber hygiene, right? So we know personally, and so I'm making the equation. So personally, we all try to eat healthy, stay fit, and these kind of things, right? And so, but when it comes to work, we often have to take some similar approaches what they do on the personal side, and then transfer that over to work as well, right? So because it's just that piece is real, and so that's the tie back to overall to the cyber hygiene. So I just want to bring that back full circle.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely. Well, of course, the big thing is how do you thwart attacks and breaches, and are there specific things that you have to deal with? I was curious to see if you had anything you could share in the last 2 years that the types of attacks or the types of situations, whether they're bad actors or identity theft. Are you dealing with certain types of things because of the nature of your organization, and are you taking special steps?
Well, I'll tell one story that's kind of fun. I mean, I think like Elias led off with, the biggest attack vector we have is email. So I'm just ready to be done with it. But I think, I was just listening to something early this morning said, 91% of attacks start off with an email. So it's always a good lead. And for us, phishing is just continuous. And we've built enough security awareness over time that we have a lot of people that will report phishing to us. Sadly, they report it to me, even though we, have channels, but I probably, I get every question just all the time, but it's part of it. However, the big, so tons of different phishing campaigns, but, as everybody deals with, the largest one is the gift cards. So it's the email that somebody gets that's from some senior person that says, hey, I'm in a meeting, can't email, can't talk, but can text, text me back at this number or whatever, right? And then there's this engagement that occurs, and then they want them to say, hey, so-and-so's kid's having a birthday party. I need you to get me some gift cards real quick. Now, I'll just take a quick aside there, and we joke about this in our information security team. I don't think I have a friend in my life that I could text and ask them to go buy me gift cards and they would do it, right? So I don't know where, I need to find these friends, because everybody would tell me to go pound sand if I asked that. So, but if you get this random email from somebody that's, says they're X person at Bellarmine, but it's really, random character string at gmail.com, you'll jump all over it. But a funny one, and I, certainly not naming any names, but we did have a community member get one of those emails, went so far as to engage with the attacker that they went to the local CVS and got a fistful of gift cards, just random gift cards, and they were checking out. And the clerk said, wow, that's a lot of gift cards. What you going to a party? And they said, no, my boss needed me to get these. And the clerk at CVS said, that's a scam. Like, so we often joke now that CVS is like that's our data protection layer. But yeah, it's and at first you get that, and it's just you kind of you laugh it off, and it is funny, but you start to realize that it's like, I mean, if you've been dealing with email and you've been dealing with these security breaches and threats for a long time, you're I guess callous to this. These things are just ridiculous. It's super easy just to delete, but there's just this kind of innate thing inside of people that it's like, oh, this person is engaged with me. They maybe revere them, or they're senior to them in the organization, and so that they want it to be true so badly that they're going to take these actions. And so I guess the strategy has really shifted in my mind from saying, like, just that simple education is not getting it. We've got to figure out a new way. And so, for us, it's partly saying, we're not going to take any action unless maybe there's, verification through multiple channels. So if somebody were to contact you through email to ask for something, then you've got to go out of band. It's not replying to that email to confirm this, but you need to go back through, our phone system, or what we would prefer is through Teams, to make sure that this random request is indeed legitimate, and kind of taking that, I think, because the other part of it is kind of that shame, like people not wanting to sort of fess up that they fell for something, or or being embarrassed, or then you get so deep into it, you just you were kind of tricked in the beginning, and now you just want it to be true so bad you're going to follow through. So there's just a whole lot of the psyche that goes along with these breaches. And the reason that 91% start there is that ultimately they are effective, so it's a problem.
Yeah, no, they work, right? I mean, so, and we're no different. Phishing attacks is, by far for most the best how these guys get in. It's, you talk about having your senior leadership be very aware. So I'll give a good plug for our CFO. We had someone, and this was, it was a wire transfer, one of those wire transfer emails, right? And so we've given them all the tips and tricks on how to identify something as a phish. And every now and then you will find some of these bad actors out here are very good at what they do. And it took a very security conscious CFO to forward the email to me. And she said, Elias, she said, I know I haven't fallen for any of your phishing emails, and I remember everything you've told us. And for this one email, it was written so well. I mean, the normal signs we typically would put out there for this, they were not there. And the only thing, or two things to her mind that kind of gave her indication that this might have been a phish. One, the CEO does not have a signature block. So this email in this case had a signature block. Two, the CEO would not ask her to conduct a wire transfer, right? So you start talking about what's our business process, right? And you make sure people understand that, because outside of that one particular wire fraud, that kind of scam there, we have had folks within the organization fall victim to a wire fraud, and to where they got halfway in the middle of the process and then they stopped and said, wait a minute, I might go ask my manager or supervisor about this, right? And so part of that comes into educating those teams that work in like Treasury, for example, saying, hey, what is your process? And then also at the same time, is it realistic that the CFO or the CEO would be reaching out to you to share this information, ask you to do this, right? And so it's kind of had us focus on those guys to really tighten up a little bit. But in the case with Gmail, with Google, and so two things that we've done from our kind of more of a tactical standpoint is we do have the enable the security banners. And so we call them, they are the blood and butter bars, right? So they're visual cues that our employee base can see. When they see them, it's like speed bumps or stoplight, right? If you see something that is red, Google with its threat intel has done all the work on the back end. So our users know when you see red, don't do it, don't click on it, right? But with the butter bar, the one that's yellow, it gives you a chance to say, it's almost like slow down, meaning this is the first time you receive the email from this person, therefore exercise caution. And so we have enabled those two things, but also too, we have turned on sandboxing, right? So anytime an email comes through that has an attachment or a link to it, Google will take it off into the sandbox, detonate it, open it, execute it to see what it's going to do. Only if it is truly benign and not malicious will that email then be allowed to pass through and get to the intended recipient. And so, but phishing, as Eric mentioned, I mean, that is very much a continuous, fight on that front, and just trying to maintain those high levels of awareness. But every now and then you will have something come through. Those wire transfers are real, and you just, once again, the gift card scam. That's just a hoot, right? Because if CVS knows that, then like look at your employee, like you didn't know that, right? So, but we've had the exact same thing with the cards, right? So exact same thing, and we've actually made some of those part of our phishing, internal phishing campaigns, to where we had a note go out from our CIO, who people know is like, he if you know him, he's not going to really give away gift cards, at Christmas time. And sure enough, we had almost 50% of the function fall victim for it. And he had a good joke, but it was serious. He said, well, you guys know me. I don't do that, because he's very cost focused, right? So yeah, but phishing, absolutely real.
So are there any outside vendors that you have pulled in to support you in the cybersecurity area? What types of consultants may be useful for someone looking at good cyber hygiene? Either one of you. Eric, do you have anyone that or types of people that you rely on?
Right. I'll throw out so my philosophy on security vendors. I mean, obviously, I'm sure we have some hanging around here, and they can be extremely useful. So I came actually before Bellarmine. I was at a bank for 13 years. So I was a CIO at a bank, and it was interesting because I really saw the maturation of information security as a practice from the FDIC and the OCC, and how they began to come to terms with it. As more and more banks took assets online, like how were they securing that? How were they offering guidance and offering, kind of compliance assurance? And I felt like they were really behind in the early days, really struggling to develop work procedures that made sense and really offered any degree of value. And so it was always this thing where you were just trying to check a box. And so we spent so much time being compliant that I didn't feel like our focus was on really being secure. And there's definitely a difference. And so just because we've, met this one security audit, the attackers walking through the door, taking all your data. And so how do you really be good at that? And how do you know that if they're asking you question X, I'm just answering that question and not really maybe having the holistic view? And I felt like that was broken. And I thought if I could ever do it differently, I would. If I ever had the freedom to kind of build an information security program in a different way, I would do it. And funny thing, when you're at a university, you've got a lot more freedom. So unfortunately, we're now considered a financial institution. And so now we're subject to GLBA because we award financial aid. So this summer we're back to going through heavy FFIEC audits, which is fine. But our pattern, and we'll continue this because I think it's great, is we try to demystify the security audit. So what do I mean? I think of audits as being somewhat adversarial engagements. So when you're, in a position at a corporation, you're trying to protect the assets, you bring an auditor in, your hackles immediately go up, because ultimately you've got the fear that they're going to do nothing but find fault in what you do. They're going to develop some kind of a report that's going to be damning to your efforts. And that's going to go to the board of directors, which just candidly probably won't understand any of it. And they're going to see that you have a critical finding and they're going to blow their stack. And you're going to be in trouble over something that you really, if you put it in context, weren't doing a bad job of at all. And so it doesn't make any sense. And at the end of the day, how much energy, how much angst did you go through to check off these critical findings that really, while it's a critical finding, maybe it's an extremely low risk of happening? Like, how many different security events do we see that get published on, the different outlets, people that are finding some of these 0-day things? And while don't hear me wrong, take them seriously, yes. But the likelihood that that's going to be the thing that gets you is low. The likelihood that it's going to be a BEC compromise is high, right? And so are you protecting against the right things? And knowing that you're doing that. So how do you figure out if you're protecting against the right things? And so you've got to make that security audit not punitive. You have got to use that as a tool to support your information security team. And so at Bellarmine, I said, we're going to do it differently. And what we do is we bring in a partner, and we bring this partner in, and I set them in the middle of our core network, and they come in for 2 weeks every year and sit down and here, get to know our enterprise infrastructure team, because this is a coworker. This isn't an auditor. This isn't a mean person. This is somebody that's here to make us better. And they're going to pull out all of the latest tools, techniques, hacks, whatever they can do. They have free access to run our network and just do anything they can. But the only deal is you've got complete amnesty. For those of us that are on the IT side, just fess up. Is there something that scares you that you just don't want to bring up because you think you're going to make me mad? I don't care. Tell this person and say, how can I be better? This worries me. Here's something that's in the corner. I'm so worried that this is going to be discovered. What can I do to guard against it? And then they're going to run tools that we didn't even know existed. And we have discovered so many new tools and techniques. We've built relationships with these people. They come in. And so the big joke on our network is, if we bring this group in, how fast are they going to be able to get domain admin access, right? I think the first time we brought them into Bellarmine, I want to say it was 10 minutes, and they had domain admin, and we've matured ourselves to the point where they're not getting it now. And it's a real challenge for us because we have a lot of public computers that are scattered around. And so they have taught us how to clean up behind ourselves when we have to do administrative work on public systems in ways. And so we'll have these people on our network just crawling around, trying to get into any computer anywhere, doing things. They're trying, physical tactics and obviously network tactics. They're drop and responder on our network and just trying to pick up people, but we have learned so much and we're 10 times better for it. And the only thing I ask out of that crew is, don't give me a document. I don't want an audit report. I don't care. All I want out of you is your OneNote notebook that you use to work on this. We sit down at the end of that engagement with that vendor and we build our security plan for the year. Here are the things we're going to work on, and we build that up in our planner board, and we spend the year burning down that list. They come back next year, try new things. What's the latest? What are the things you're seeing? What are the tools you're using? And they attack us in different ways. We learn from that. We apply that to what we're doing to get better. We get better. And all the same time, I've got these other regular audits that are happening, and I let them do the thing that they do, and that's fine. I appreciate the feedback that I get. It tends to be more compliance and policy based, fantastic. But I know I sleep better at night from having our trusted vendor that sits in the core with me and pounds us, and we have a relationship with, and it's constructive and not adversarial. So that's kind of, at least that's my philosophy. So.
No, well, hey, once again, Eric, you're preaching the gospel to brother on this thing, right? So I think certainly, you know, from the assessments and from the audits piece, you're absolutely correct. And just a quick note, because I'm only respectful of time as well. It's to your earlier comment about just because they find something that's critical, right? So I made the comment before, you have to Brown-Formanize it, or you Bellarminize it or something, right? Because, and just because it's critical for this, when you come back and look at it from your lens or perspective, it's not, right? So you often have to level set, right? So, you know, Don, from a services standpoint, you know, certainly, you know, the security audits, security assessments, you know, we do a lot of red team assessments, penetration assessments, you know, program maturity assessments. And, you know, it's like Eric mentioned, I think that when I first came on board, they had just conducted a red team assessment. And I think as Eric mentioned, and when I looked at how quickly they got in and got the domain admin, I was like, are you kidding me? My wife knows I was looking at the report, and she heard me on the couch making noises. She's like, are you still going to take it? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it, right? We're going to turn this program around. And to Eric's point today, you know, it's taken them substantially longer to get in, and then they don't get in through email. They got in through Google Hangouts, right? Fish alone Hangouts, which is something that doesn't happen that often. Could it? Yes. Other services that kind of help me sleep at night is, like I mentioned before, we outsource our security operations. And so using a managed security service, you know, there are a number of them out there, whether it be security operations, it can be your log management, your SIEM, patch management. But we use that one to help with our monitor detection of our network. And so manage any, you know, you find your appropriate security service for you that fits your need. That certainly helps me. Another thing that kind of helps me at sleep at night as well too. So I have a small team. And so if we actually do have an incident that takes place, you know, we're only capable of doing so much with it. So we have a partner that is on a retainer. It's an incident response retainer. And so that way, if we have an incident that truly is critical, I know within, you know, based on severity, within a certain hour time frame, I've got someone who's on the phone already. They've already got accounts to be able to access the network, start doing forensics. I know within 24 to 72 hours, I got boots on the ground. Someone's here locally, you know, sitting side by side with my team to actually get in and assess, you know, what's going on and those things, so that we then can focus on providing updates to leadership, et cetera, so on. And so, like I said, the three services I would focus on, certainly security audits and assessments, the managed security service, and then for me, it's that incident response retainer to help augment, you know, my team and make sure we can get to the bottom if we have an incident.
Well, thank you guys for working with us today, and appreciate everyone who has attended this session. We're going to go ahead and close this session and jump into our next session.